Hi everyone. Get me another drink, wimp, then go upstairs and take care of her. Yes, sir, Tim said, and then shuffled off to the kitchen, humiliated and dressed in nothing but his shame. Donald chuckled as he watched Tim disappear to do his bidding. Donald had just crossed a line in Tim's marriage with Amy, leaving her barely conscious in their marital bed. He settled into the comfortable leather recliner that used to be Tim's chair and pulled a nice cigar from the silver case on the end table. Just as he reached for the lighter, the doorbell rang. Get the door, loser. Tim was out of earshot and did not respond. Suddenly there was a fist pounding on the door. Blast! Donald yelled, standing up and stomping to the door. He wrapped one meaty hand around the handle and jerked the door open. There before him was Tim, except he was fully clothed and he was holding something in his hand. How did you? Donald twitched uncontrollably as the voltage from the taser paralyzed him. The second Tim pressed the taser against Donald's bare chest as he spasmed and fell backward. The second Tim stepped through the door and kicked it shut behind him. When Donald regained consciousness, he found himself fastened to a metal post with zip ties. He shook his head and slowly realized he was sitting on a wooden chair that was pushed against the metal support post. Looking around, he recognized the basement. This is the same post we had tied Tim to when I first came here with Amy. What's going on? Donald's foggy mind questioned as his vision continued to clear. Well, welcome back, jerk. I'm sure you recognize this basement as the place where you and that tortured my baby brother. Brother? I didn't know Timmy had a brother. Why you here? My brother and I have not spoken in 3 years. We last spoke on his wedding day when I begged him not to marry that unfaithful woman, Tom said as he pointed to the unconscious form zip-tied to another support pole. Where's Timmy? Hey, loser, get down here, Donald yelled. Tom laughed. Tim is sleeping and he'll be sleeping for several more hours, but he's no longer your concern. Now you have to deal with me. Donald laughed loudly. So what? Do you need me to steal your wife too? Listen, pal, all you had to do was ask. Tom stepped closer. Donald could see he was wearing tight leather gloves. While he couldn't see the brass knuckles sewn into the gloves, he surely felt them when Tom's fist smashed into his face. You see, Donald, I'm here to help you make an attitude adjustment. You mistakenly believed you could mistreat my little brother and disrespect his marriage with that worthless excuse of a wife and no one could stop you. Well, you were mistaken. And before I leave here tonight, I'm certain you will have seen the error of your ways. Wait please. She asked me to be with her. She said he wanted it. I thought I was doing what he wanted. Donald tried to recoil, but the backhand was too fast. The blow spun his head sideways. Tom leaned into his battered face. So you actually thought Tim wanted you to beat him when he tried to throw you and that woman out of the house? That he wanted to be tied up and forced to watch you violate his marriage? And what? You thought he was just pretending when he screamed in pain while you held him and that sadistic woman hurt him? When she brought you home with her, she told you she wanted you to hurt him, didn't she? Just a day after he had her served with divorce papers, she finds you to help her put Tim in his place. I'm sure she told you the plan was to torture him until he broke and agreed to serve the two of you. Yes, oh God. She said she'd reward me and pay me $5,000. Please let me go. It was all her idea. Please just let me go and you'll never see me again. Tom patted his smashed cheek. There, Donald boy. I'm going to give you a chance to earn your freedom. Then Tom pressed the taser to Donald's chest. Donald jolted and then collapsed into unconsciousness. When Donald awoke, his chest was bound in a wide leather band that held him firmly to the post. His arms were free, but his wrists were bound together. Sitting directly in front of him was Amy, bound to a small chair with duct tape across her mouth. Donald looked around wildly, trying to locate his tormentor. Tom stepped out of the shadows. Okay, Donald, this is your only chance to get out of this basement alive. Put your hands around her throat. Donald looked at Amy as her eyes widened in fear, and she screamed into her gag. He reached out and fit his hands around her throat. Now here's the deal. If you harm her badly, I'll let you go. You have to do it and then I know you won't go to the police. If you don't, I'll harm both of you. It's your choice. Donald looked into the terrified face of the woman he'd been seeing for the past 3 weeks. You dragged me into this mess and I'm not taking the fall for you. He reached toward Amy, his actions driven by desperation and fear, until she fell still. When Donald awoke from the shock he'd received, he was sitting in his car at a roadside rest on the freeway. He got out of the car and looked around. He was alone. He got back into the car and looked for his keys. Above the visor was a note, "Keys in trunk." He pulled the trunk release and got out to get his keys. When he opened the trunk, he was staring at Amy's motionless body. The keys lay next to her, along with a long-handled shovel. He grabbed the keys and slammed the trunk closed. "Oh no, I've got to get rid of that body," he told himself. Donald drove back onto the freeway and didn't stop until it was dark and he was more than 100 miles away. He then exited onto a county road out in the middle of nowhere. He drove down a country lane and pulled over, killing the lights. There were no visible lights anywhere as he opened the trunk. After burying the body, Donald got in his car and made his way back to the freeway. He decided to put even more distance between himself and that crazy man at Tim's house. His face ached, but he was alive and he wanted to remain that way. 3 months earlier, Tim Hollister had been married to Amy for 5 years, and those years had been the most painful of his life. He had met her at a company party where she worked in the human resources department. She had seemed so vibrant and full of life, sweeping him off his feet with her charm and beauty. 3 months of whirlwind romance had led to a hasty wedding, despite his brother's protests. "She's not who you think she is, Tim," Tom had warned during their last conversation before the wedding. "I've had her background checked. She's done this before." Done what before? Tim had demanded, anger rising at his brother's interference. Found a good man, married him quickly, then systematically broken him down while stealing everything he had. Her last husband ended up in therapy for years. The argument had escalated until Tim told Tom he never wanted to see him again. Tom had quietly responded, "I'll always be there when you need me, little brother, whether you believe it or not." Tim had dismissed the warning, but within months of the wedding, Amy began to change. It started subtly: criticism about his appearance, jokes about his manhood in front of friends, accidentally spending their savings on frivolous purchases. She would disappear for days, claiming to be with friends, and return smelling of cologne that wasn't Tim's. When he confronted her, she would cry and manipulate him into believing he was being paranoid. She'd promised to change, to be better, and for a few weeks, things would improve before the cycle began again. Eventually, Tim caught her with irrefutable evidence, photos sent to his phone anonymously showing Amy with another man at a hotel. That night they had their worst fight ever. Amy didn't even try to deny it. "You're pathetic," she had sneered. "You can't satisfy me, you can't protect me, and you can't keep me. I need a real man." The next day, Tim contacted a divorce attorney and had Amy served with papers. Her reaction had been unexpected. Rather than anger, she'd laughed. "You think you can just throw me away?" she taunted. "Everything in this house is half mine, and I'll take the other half too. When I'm done with you, you'll be begging me to come back." 2 days later, she'd returned home with Donald, a man-mountain who stood 6'5" and outweighed Tim by at least 100 pounds. Donald had grabbed Tim immediately, punching him twice in the stomach and once in the face, knocking him to the floor. "This is Donald," Amy had announced with a smirk. "He's going to help me teach you some respect." What followed was 2 weeks of systematic torture and humiliation. Donald had moved into the master bedroom with Amy while Tim was forced to sleep in the basement, tied to the support post when they weren't forcing him to cook and clean for them. They monitored his phone, preventing him from calling for help, and Amy had called his workplace, claiming he had a family emergency and would be out indefinitely. Unbeknownst to both Amy and Tim, Tom had been keeping tabs on his brother from a distance. His work as a private security consultant for government contractors had given him skills and resources most people didn't have access to. When Tim hadn't shown up to work for 2 weeks, Tom's contact at Tim's company had alerted him. Tom Hollister had always been the protective older brother. Growing up in foster care after their parents died in a car accident had forged an unbreakable bond between the brothers, at least until Amy came along. As he drove to Tim's house that night, Tom remembered the promise he'd made to his parents at their graveside. He would always protect his little brother. Tom had surveilled the house for 3 days before making his move. He cataloged their routines, witnessed the abuse firsthand through high-powered binoculars, and formulated his plan. He would need to separate Amy and Donald from Tim, gather evidence, and ensure they could never hurt his brother again. On the fourth night, Tom disabled the house's security system remotely and entered through the back door while Donald and Amy were busy upstairs. He found Tim tied to the post in the basement, bruised and malnourished. "Tommy?" Tim had whispered in disbelief when he saw his brother. "I'm getting you out of here, little brother," Tom assured him, cutting the restraints with a tactical knife. "You don't understand," Tim said frantically. "He'll kill us both. He's insane," and she encourages him. "Trust me, I've dealt with worse," Tom replied calmly. "But I need you to do exactly as I tell you." Tom administered a mild sedative to his brother. "This will help you rest. When you wake up, you'll be safe." He carried Tim to his vehicle parked 2 blocks away, then returned to the house to implement the next phase of his plan. The rest of the story played out as Tom had planned. He waited for Donald to come downstairs, tasered him, and brought him to the basement where he'd already secured Amy. The confrontation that followed was designed to do 2 things: gather evidence, and set Donald up to take the fall. What Donald didn't know was that Tom never intended for him to actually kill Amy. The woman Donald thought he had strangled was actually just unconscious from a sedative Tom had administered, and the body in Donald's trunk was an elaborate prop designed to convince Donald he had committed murder. The real Amy was secure in another location, still sedated, with Tom's associate watching over her. Tom had recorded everything: Donald's confession about the abuse, his willingness to murder Amy to save himself, and Amy's earlier admission about setting up Tim for abuse and financial ruin. Donald drove for 3 straight days, crossing state lines multiple times, paranoid and certain he was being hunted for murder. He abandoned his car in Nevada, used his savings to buy a used truck with cash from a private seller, and changed his identity. He would spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, expecting police or worse to find him. Meanwhile, Tim recovered at a private medical facility where Tom had connections. The physical wounds healed faster than the psychological ones, but with therapy and his brother's support, Tim slowly began to rebuild his life and his trust in people. Amy woke up in a rehabilitation facility in another state, with fabricated medical records indicating she had admitted herself for substance abuse treatment. Next to her bed was an envelope containing divorce papers, copies of the evidence against her and Donald, and a note. "The police have copies of everything. Return to Tim's life in any way, and these go to them immediately. Speak of what happened, and these go to them immediately. Contest the divorce in any way, and these go to them immediately. Consider this your one chance to walk away." She signed the papers that same day. 1 year later, Tim opened his mail and read the final decree saying his divorce was granted based on abandonment. He could now remarry if he ever found a woman he could trust. His brother Tom had tried to warn him about Amy, but he hadn't listened. Tom had read a report on Amy and begged him not to marry her. After they argued, and Tim told Tom he never wanted to see him again, Tom vowed to keep an eye out for Tim. When his people saw the divorce filing, Tim decided to reconnect with his brother. En route, Tom got another report, and so he showed up prepared for Donald. Tim had a lot of questions about how Tom just showed up and convinced Amy and Donald to leave. He was reluctant to take Tom's word about not asking more questions until 2 men in unremarkable gray suits showed up at his door. They told him Tom was contracted to do work for the government, and it would be wise for Tim not to ask any questions about Tom's job. Tim believed them and took their advice, but the brothers had rebuilt their relationship, meeting for dinner every Sunday and gradually healing the rift that Amy had caused. 5 years later, "Uncle Tim, Uncle Tim," the little girl called as she ran across the lawn. Tim scooped up his 5-year-old niece and spun her around. "There's my favorite girl," he laughed. Across the backyard, Tom stood at the grill with his wife, Sarah, watching his brother with their daughter. "He's really come a long way," Sarah observed. "He has," Tom agreed. "I wasn't sure he'd ever trust anyone again after what happened." Tim set his niece down and walked over to join them, accompanied by a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. "Jenny was just saying we should all go camping next month when the weather cools down," Tim said, putting his arm around his girlfriend of 2 years. "That sounds perfect," Tom replied, grateful to see his brother happy and whole again. Later that evening, as the brothers cleaned up after dinner while the women chatted on the patio, Tim asked the question he'd been holding back for years. What really happened to them, Tom? To Amy and Donald? Tom paused, considering his answer carefully. Amy is living in Seattle under a different name. She's been through 3 more marriages and divorces since then. Donald believed he killed her and has been running ever since. Last I heard, he was working under an assumed name at a gas station in New Mexico, still looking over his shoulder every day. Did you ever consider really hurting them? Tim asked quietly. Tom looked his brother in the eye. The best revenge isn't causing physical pain, Timmy. It's making sure they live with the consequences of what they've done. Donald will never have a normal life again. He'll spend every day in fear. And Amy will keep repeating the same patterns until she dies alone. They made their choices. Tim nodded slowly. I'm glad you found me when you did. I told you at Mom and Dad's funeral, little brother. I'll always be there when you need me. Tom smiled. Boys. In a small gas station on the outskirts of Albuquerque, a man who now called himself Frank jumped at the sound of police sirens passing on the highway. His manager noticed and shook his head. You're always so jumpy, Frank. You running from something? The man who was once known as Donald, once proud and intimidating, now stooped and haggard from years of stress and fear, forced a weak smile. Just ghosts, sir. Just ghosts. Every night when he closed his eyes, he saw Amy's face as his hands tightened around her throat. Every day he expected to see police cars pulling up to arrest him. The fear had hollowed him out, leaving nothing but a shell of the man he once was. And in Seattle, Amy Reynolds, now using her 4th married name, stared at divorce papers yet again, her latest husband having discovered her affair with his business partner. At 45, her looks were fading, her charm wearing thin, and her pattern of manipulation increasingly transparent to others. She sometimes thought about Tim, the only man who had truly loved her, and wondered what might have been if she had recognized the value of his devotion. But such reflections were brief. Amy was incapable of true introspection or change. As for the Hollister brothers, they had learned the most valuable lesson of all. True strength isn't found in dominating others, but in standing together against those who would cause harm. Their bond, tested but unbroken, was stronger than ever. Tim looked across the table at his brother and raised his glass. To family, he said simply. Tom nodded and clinked his glass against Tim's. To family, he echoed. The only thing that really matters. And so we've reached the end of today's story. Was it what you expected, or did it take a twist you didn't see coming? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below and let's get a conversation going. If this story kept you hooked, make sure to hit that like button. And if you're new here or just haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to join our community. I bring you fresh, captivating stories every day, so click that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.